A warm welcome to you all. This is our final CPD of the Craft School Material World, our third one. And these CPDs are developed to enhance your time with us and to support you to deliver craft school with your students in your learning settings. My name is Melissa Jamal, and I am the Education Manager here at the Crafts Council. And also joining us today from the Crafts Council team, we've got Faith, who was our Learning and Sector Support Coordinator. So for each session, we invite an education specialist to share their insights into craft teaching and learning, alongside a craft professional who will deliver a make-along workshop using the make-first approach and focusing on one of the three themes: renewable materials, reclaim and reuse, and creative mending. So an overview of what the session will look like today. Today, we will hear from Michele Gregson, who will be presenting our anti-racist art education checklist, explaining how this checklist can be applied to address other equity issues, as well as a make-along with Sam Ayre, who will feature a hands-on activity centering around the theme of renewable materials. So our first presenter today, Michele Gregson. Michele is joining us today from the NSEAD, the National Society for Education in Art and Design. NSEAD is a professional association and trade union for art, craft and design educators in the UK. It's a huge privilege to have you here today, Michele, so thank you so much, and over to you.
Oh, thanks, Melissa. It's always good to be here. Let me just do share screen if I can. I've got a couple of slides. And thank you, all of you who are here and taking the time to, just take time out and think about your own professional development, because it really is the key, I think, to everything. And whether you're here in the room or you're listening on catch up, hopefully we'll have a few kind of useful things for you and some resources to direct you to. So let's see if I can actually make this work. Let me begin. It's funny how these things work perfectly just sort of 10 minutes before you start, isn't it? And then they do their own thing. Okay, so Melissa asked me to sort of come talk to you about particularly these issues of equity and how we make sure that we are representing and then actively including all students within our curriculum. And so I'm kind of picking up on the theme, if I can, of I'm going to kind of go right back. The theme of Craft School this year of reuse and reclaim was back there. And I'm going to invite you to reclaim the curriculum, which maybe is a bold ask, but to basically hand it back to your learners to shape it, co-create it and craft it. And, the question I guess you might well have for me is, well, why? Well, quite simply, we know that too many people, too many children are being left behind. We know this because the creative industries workforce doesn't reflect in any way the UK population and its reality. And whether we're looking through the lens of gender, disability, class, race, or indeed any characteristic, the children sitting in our classrooms are just not finding their way into that creative industries workforce. And we have the power to do something about it. We can reclaim curriculum. So that's what I want to talk to you about over the next sort of 10 minutes or so. And I thought I'd just start by taking a look at what inclusion in our subject is looking like through the lens of race, because we've had some really excellent research work to give us some insight into that over the last 18 months. And as Melissa says, we've done a lot of work at NCAD around race and inclusion and support for teachers. So the key piece of research that I'd direct you to, if you want to dig into it, is the Visualise report, which was an investigation into race and inclusion in secondary school art education. So it looks specifically and it talks to secondary school students and teachers, but I have to say the findings are very applicable to primary and indeed all phases and settings. So I'm going to give you some of the things that they found, play back some sort of key points for you to consider. I mean, the first thing to say is the Visualise report authors were really clear that art, craft and design is one of the only subjects that really explicitly offers a space where we can indulge in personal exploration, where students are encouraged to respond to the world and their place within it. So it's an incredibly valuable subject for learners, and so particularly worrying and concerning if they are being locked out for whatever reason. And they found some really quite shocking things when it comes to race and inclusion. So GCSE exam papers for those students that end up taking a GCSE in the subject remain incredibly limiting. Just 2.3% of named artists that are referenced in GCSE art exam papers are from Black or South Asian backgrounds. That's quite sobering. Particularly as nearly 2/3 of the students they surveyed said they wanted to study artists from a wider range of ethnic backgrounds. And when they spoke to Black students, that figure rose to 80%. So students, they're not seeing themselves in the curriculum, and certainly not in the GCSE exam papers that they sit. And teachers aren't particularly comfortable about how to tackle this. 1/3 of the teachers that the Visualise report author spoke to hadn't themselves encountered the work of any minority ethnic artists in their own education. And 90% of them said that if they were given extra resources dedicated to the work of minority ethnic artists, it would help them. So again, this is a bit of a call for action, particularly for us at NCAD. Fewer than 4 in 10 teachers said they felt confident in the kind of language to use. 82% said, can we have additional resources and content to help us talk about race and diversity? And just 6% of students felt that they could relate to artists introduced in their own classrooms. And that's really important, because if they don't feel that they can relate to the references that they're being presented with, then where's the motivation to engage? If they can't see themselves in the curriculum, if they can't see their own lives, their aspirations, their interests, and their lived experiences, why would they choose our subject? Less than 10% said that art helped them understand their own lives. If we go back to that statement I started with, that art is one of the only subjects that does it in this very personal way, that is really, really tragic. Less than 10%. And then finally, final sobering stat, and then I'll stop with the numbers, but parents and parents' views of how important art, craft and design is for their children to learn at school. Well, opinions were substantially more negative among minority ethnic families. 19% of Asian students, 18% of Black students, 17% of students with other ethnicities, and 8% of students with mixed ethnicities said that their parents had told them to focus on other subjects. That compares with just 5% of white students whose parents said, no, don't bother with art, craft and design, drop it, do something important. That's a big, big gap. So we feel like it's important and we need to do something about it. And that notion of lack of representation and racism in particular is an area that NCAD members have been determined to tackle head on. The work was really powered by our anti-racist art and craft and design education group, which includes folks from Crafts Council. It's a mixture of people who have got a passion and determination, they've got expertise, they've got lived experience, and they work together to create resources, useful tools. The key thing they did was to speak to us, to speak to the membership, and create challenge to say, look, it's not just that we need to do something, we need to recognise that our curriculum, what's in it, and the way that it's organised is actually part of the problem. So all the work they've done, the checklists, which you can find on the NCAD website, which are a series of questions that the group put together to help teachers to just reflect and think about what they're doing in their curriculum, how they're doing it, and indeed why. So they've been really sort of carefully structured and considered, not to tell us what to do, but to help us find the answers for ourselves and to engage in conversations and have the confidence to do that, to use helpful terminology when we're having conversations with students. So please do check them out. There's also some e-learning modules that are there, which are quite helpful, that you can use as part of staff meetings or just kind of for your own development. And you can use those alongside our big landscape planning toolkit that kind of helps to look at where it might sit within your planning. And the point really is that it's all about striving for better practice. It's not about being perfect. It's not about reaching some notional best practice. It's about striving for it and just always being better. And before I came on the call, I was talking to Melissa about the current curriculum review that you might be aware of. I'm encouraged to report that the need to focus on representation has come through loud and clear to the Department for Education as part of this curriculum review. So they're gathering evidence, consulting, having conversations, and they are getting the message that representation is an issue that they need to take on. And they've been feeding that in recent meetings with NCAD, with the curriculum panel, and the officials who are going to be tasked with making amendments to the curriculum. So we're working on it. We are being heard, and that's important. The reason we're being heard, and I want to make this point, is because of the work that you, teachers, are doing, and the fact that you're doing it in partnership with really credible, trusted organisations like Crafts Council. The messaging is really clear and focused, and it's been led by evidence of what's needed. And certainly with this curriculum review, if it isn't evidence-based, they are not interested in looking at it. They're not interested in emotional arguments about why art, craft and design is so important. And really critically, and this is where working with folks like the Crafts Council, with artists like Sam comes in, through the work that you do, through programs like this, you are the ones who can show them what better practice looks like. So we're not just telling them, we're able to show them as well. We felt it all came down really to three key messages. So if we're thinking about equity for learners, if we're thinking about all of our learners, our pupils, and their entitlement to an excellent arts education, we felt it came down to equity, opportunity for all, whatever your situation, wherever you go to school. And that doesn't mean that everyone gets the same, of course. It means that everyone gets what they need. That's the difference between equity and equality, and it is important. To achieve that, we need a curriculum that is locally designed, future-facing, learner-centred, contemporary. And that means not just taking an off-the-shelf model and kind of, just delivering it as it stands, but cherry picking from all the good stuff that's out there, all the different resources and curriculum models and programs that you can be part of, and then using it in a way that works for you to excite your pupils. I talked about our big landscape toolkit that sits alongside the anti-racist checklist. That's where we can go in and take these kind of all the different lenses of equity, look at the resources you're using, look at the way you want to work. And the big landscape toolkit it's hopefully a helpful tool to help you make sense of it all, pull it together, and be able to articulate really clearly how programs like Craft School are part of your learner-centered curriculum. And then finally, of course, none of that can happen without you. So our third final aim of our manifesto is about workforce, because the key to excellent educational experiences for our children is excellent, confident, healthy, well-paid teachers. So, you know, that's what we're kind of calling for and working for alongside all of our partners. And that's why I'm such a fan of Craft School. It is about reaching for this notion of better practice. Craft School delivers absolutely brilliantly against NSEAD manifesto aims. If we were going to write a programme, we couldn't have done better for the things that we want to achieve. It's action-led advocacy, as far as I'm concerned. It's supporting your professional development as teachers, looking after you, and it's creating most amazing opportunities through craft for your learners. It's learner-centred, and the program's all about working and learning together. And that's children, teachers, designers, creatives, whoever is has an interest in the area of craft, that this is an opportunity to come together. And what do we do? Well, we're exploring really big questions that face us, and questions that your children, your learners are interested in. I think there's perhaps no bigger question than the one posed by climate emergency and the themes that are explored through Craft School. The theme this year of reclaim and reuse in particular. I'd draw your attention to this lovely issue of AD magazine. It's our member magazine. Do go and check it out. It was the autumn edition. It was a takeover by our climate emergency and art and craft education special interest group. So it's a group of people who come together to think about what they can do to address these issues through and in arts and crafts education. It's a really brilliant resource. You can find it on our website, or if you call our office, if you haven't got a hard copy, you can get a hard copy of it. Melissa, we can certainly arrange for folks who are taking part in Craft School this year to get a copy of this if they want one. In particular, there's a brilliant piece in there by Bridget McKenzie, who's an artist, craftivist. She's director of the Climate Museum. In her article in AD magazine, Bridget introduces us to a concept called positopias, and that's a play on utopias, these wonderful ideal worlds that we might imagine, possibility and positivity. Now, being positopian is about, Bridget tells us, drawing on the realities of science and technology, whilst at the same time harnessing the full powers of the imagination. And I would say that craft is what allows us to combine these things. You can do it through a make-first pedagogy, which is something that the Craft School introduced brilliantly, but combining that with critical and contextual curiosity, you know, what's going on in the world around us, developing empathy, and engaging with the world in a very active, creative, positopian way. I just want to finish with a tongue twister for you. Sorry, that tongue twister, which is Craft School is planet positive. It's people positive pedagogy in action. Together, engaging with Craft School, I really believe that you and your pupils can start a pathway to planet positive positopia, where everyone is seen, everyone belongs, and everyone is included. I'm really, really looking forward to being part of the judging panel this year. I can't wait to see what you do. Those of you that have got your entries underway, good luck and enjoy it.
Wow, it's absolutely fantastic. Thank you. There is so much to think about, and you've raised so many fantastic points, particularly that this challenge is very much action-led, learner-centered, and the teacher's at the heart of it all. So that was wonderful. Thank you so much, Michele. Up next, we have our Make Along with Sam Ayre. Sam is a socially engaged artist with a supporting studio practice based in rural East Sussex, sorry. So that's enough about me talking about you, Sam. Why don't you introduce yourself
Well,
and
thanks.
tell us a little bit more about your practice. If you don't have your Make Along tools, go and grab them now. And I hand it over to you, Sam. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you. Thank you, Michele. That was really great to hear what's going on at the NSEAD. Really appreciate everyone being here, who's here. And yeah, I'm Sam. I'm an artist. I'm based in East Sussex. And my background is I was a teacher. I was a secondary school classroom teacher. And also worked in primary and early years teaching music and art. And yeah, through that journey of working in schools, ended up with an art practice that just looks like, I guess, like all the bits that I thought were like the best bits of teaching. Speaking to people, hearing their stories, working with ideas that I might bring into a space that or someone else might bring in, using some whatever materials are to hand, and yeah, just like having a good time and no marking. That's the main, like no marking and no data, which is, I love it. But I've got a real interest with reclaiming and reusing materials that has always been running through my practice from even when I was teaching in a classroom, because we all know how dire budgets are. So you have to get creative with using what you can find or what's lying around or what's yeah, I used to one of my favorite resources was always the skits that would appear over the school holidays, especially the summer holidays, and then go in and pull half of it back out and stick it in my art classroom. But yeah, so today we're gonna be thinking about in particular, I guess, like charcoal, just really I guess kind of quite simple material, and thinking about like how we can make it ourselves if you want, and if you've got the space, and if you've got the time and the willing, and but also some different like techniques. So I'm gonna show a few things, but I'm also going to encourage people, everyone who's here, you can ask me any questions as we're going on. Like I really welcome that. Like I really appreciate that. And if I'm saying something and you're like, I would like an example of that, just say, hey, I'd like an example, like, provide me with one. So yeah. So I was going to show, here is some bits of charcoal that I made the other day for a bit of an experiment for a workshop that's coming up next month that I'm running, where I wanted to try and make some really big chunky pieces for people who might have maybe some restrictions with their mobility to be able to work and hold, and also maybe I was thinking about making some really bigger, larger pieces so that people could work together. Like a real focus and interest in my work is collaboration and what that looks like in lots of different ways. So how I made these pieces, and you think like let's say a piece like this, like looks a bit different to maybe a piece you would expect to find. I remember having a box of these that always last about 5 minutes before they all get snapped into tiny pieces. The main difference being, like, when they're nice and big, you've got a lot more different sort of textures to be able to draw with. Like you can use things on there. I quite like using them on their edge. And you've got a lot more different mark making possibilities. But before I really get stuck into the charcoal, I'm going to tell you how to make it. Now, I think we'll provide like a link for like a really simple YouTube video of how to do this, because there's loads out there, but this one's like the simplest, and I think it's not very complicated at all. Essentially, you get a stick, and let's say like it can be wherever, in a hedge, in a tree, whatever. You know, the smaller the stick, the smaller the piece of charcoal. And how charcoal's made is it is about removing all the moisture from a piece of wood without burning it. So it's about heat, but it's not, it's about cooking it really. So how to make this, you use something like a tin can. Here is one that I have definitely made charcoal in before. And you get your stick, whatever it is. Here's some, these are quite thick and they will take a long time to make. You pop them in there, and then you can either, you can do this. This is one way, and you put this, you put the tin foil over the top, and then you make a hole in it like that, and you put it on a fire. And I know that most classrooms, actually, I have yet to see a classroom with an open fire in, but you need to put it in a fire. Now, you might want to do this in, like, I've done it before with at a primary school that had a forest school space running, and I worked with the forest school teacher. This was part of a larger project that I was doing for students to be able to make drawing materials. I've also done it at a community allotment space where maybe there is a space, have a little fire pit or something. But once you've got your tin pan with the bits of wood in and your tin foil on top, you stick that in the fire, just like that. I would use a pair of sort of thick gloves that would be suitable for, that would be fine for handling something hot, or failing that, you can also use sort of like 2 long sticks and plop that in the fire. You want it to go in the fire until you'll see when it starts heating up, out of the hole will start coming steam. Like it just looks like kettle. It comes out really, really fast. And then that's all the moisture within the wood. Like wood is about somewhere between, depending on the types of wood, sort of 40 to sort of 60% water. So there's a lot of moisture to come out of it. And as that's coming out as steam, you just watch this hole, and then the steam changes to smoke, and you'll see that like smoke starts coming out. It's like a little chimney. And there is a bit of a skill and practice. You can maybe, I'll show you an example of some that maybe could do in a bit longer. Here we go. And you see here, the edges have started to cook on this edge here. And then this bit here still looks like wood. And that's because I need to leave it in there longer, which you can do. You can put it back in, but I wanted to show you an example of maybe where it hasn't worked quite so well. And that's it. And then once this is smoking, and it's been smoking for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, you then safely find a way of taking it off the fire, and then you will shake it out, and then some bits of charcoal will be there. Now, the success rate, like anything that you're doing yourself for the first few times, is pretty low, I would say. It was for me. It still is for me, because every time you're doing different thicknesses of pieces of wood, you have to work, it ends up with different pieces. Here's some bits. Where's a bit? I made some bits, they're in here, that were from more sort of uniform stick. And then, you know, these feel like just like exactly the same as what you would buy in a shop. So that's enough about how to make charcoal, I think. Now, I'm thinking about, with my practice all the time, I'm thinking about how do I don't know, like use, how do I have as little an impact on the world around me, but also simultaneously, how can I create something that might also benefit other beings, I guess, as well? Like, so when I'm doing like sketches for my, like I'm in my studio now, like there's some drawings on the wall when I'm like just sketching stuff out. Instead of using like a sketchbook where I've got like bits of paper with that's all been gone through a process and it's bleached and all this sort of thing. I will just, I like to use and think about, just bits of packaging and things, either from my own recycling box, or maybe from, it might be in school. There might be lots of things happen. There's space where there's, there's lots of this around. And not only is it reclaiming and reusing that for something, I think it's really useful to start to think about how everything, when we're making art or doing anything creative, not everything has to be so like precious about it. Like, we don't have to really like think of, for me anyway, my interest is not in like making one really, high value individual item that then I might sell to a very wealthy individual, and that's not how I make artwork, or even how I make a living. I don't really sell many pieces of artwork. I don't know many artists that really do make a living, who are maybe from a more working class background, who make their money by doing that. But I like to think about using recycled and reclaimed materials that then can also, something like this and something like this that is like unbleached. This is quite thick, but this is better. This is just a paper bag. This can be ripped up into smaller pieces and put on a compost heap, because as part of the balance in your compost heap, yes, you do need your vegetables and you need your, all that sort of the green element that goes into your compost heap, but to keep the balance of it, you also need browns. Let's say, so they say, it's, I think it's about 50-50, a bit more maybe towards browns. So you want to, I do actually do this, work that gets made, little sketches. Let's say I'm designing or thinking about I have a carpentry practice, like, and I make sort of stools and benches. I might just play around with thinking about, like, do I want to do it like this? Is it going to look like that? Maybe I could do like a bit like that. Maybe that should come through there. And rather than this all being in a sketchbook, well, I'm just thinking about it. I might just think, oh, I don't necessarily need to keep that. I don't like that idea. Maybe I'd like to change the shape of it. Anyway. And then afterwards, it's all gets ripped up, shredded up, and I put it in the compost heap. Now, I have come across and worked with a couple of schools that have compost heaps. They have forest school spaces. There is often attached to the kitchen like a green waste. Their green waste often goes into a school compost heap. I've also done a project where we established a compost heap in a primary school, which wasn't my idea, it was the children's, which was really nice. Yeah, so that's just me thinking about materials. So here's some bit of packaging for something, and I thought we'd think about the different ways of maybe using the charcoal that you might want to introduce in the classroom. And these are all ways that I have introduced students to working in charcoal in the classroom. So I know very, very simply, you're picking the charcoal up in your hand and you are making a mark. Like that, maybe. It can be really nice and a really simple thing to sort of free people up, to introduce people to a material. That's just thinking about how do we move the, like, sort of the roles that we might do within using this material. That makes sense. So, like, what I mean by that is, instead of moving the charcoal on the onto the whatever the surface is, you're using a bit of cardboard. You might want to hold it really still. I quite like doing this. Hold this really still, and then you're moving the paper around. Now, it can be quite frustrating, but it also might be quite freeing for some people. And it can also work really nicely as a way for people to sort of start introducing some like pair work or small group work. So you might want to, you could have one person holding it, another person moving it, and you could have someone else giving instructions of what they would like to see drawn. That's quite a nice way of encouraging some sort of collaborative and thinking about some communication skills. So that's quite nice. Like I said, feel free to interject at any moment, anyone. Like, what? Or have any questions, or you've got some better ideas. I'm always open for people to have better ideas. Another thing, especially with using the sort of reclaimed materials, is using the restrictions that sort of exist in the materials. So on this bit of cardboard, it's got these ridges in, and instead of me trying to resist those ridges and be like, oh, I want to try and force this material to do something it doesn't really want to do, it's can be quite nice just to think about, how do I incorporate the way the material's been structured and processed into the drawing. So you can see here I'm just using the charcoal around the lines, and I've made a load of lines, but then also might want to work across them. Anyway, so that's another thing to think about, which I quite like thinking about, is thinking about those limitations that might come with using, like, and good limitations, like, and restrictions that might come with using reclaimed and found materials. Within my work, my art practice work that doesn't look like a, hang on, let me find a piece. Look, like in the studio, I might make things like out of wood, and these sort of sculptures that look and that are functional as well as objects, are all made from found and reclaimed materials. So this top piece of wood here is from a windowsill that someone was having, a neighbour was having fitted, and well, that was an offcut, and I went and just asked the person fitting that, can I have this little bit of windowsill? These legs on the stool here are hazel, they're just from the hedge. I am fortunate that all these things are like things like a hedge are lying around because I'm in the countryside. But you'd be surprised how many bits of wood there are lying around the city, and more urban and built environments. Yeah, and I put these together using, again, tools, really quite simple tools that that are all hand tools, that I inherited from my grandfather, who was a carpenter, and my approach to working in wood is very much the same as when I'm working with a drawing practice. I resist the temptation to be like, oh, I could make this if I just buy this one piece of machinery, or I just buy this particular thing and then I could make this thing that I have in my head. Like, I do my utmost to use the material, the tools that I have, learn new skills all the time. Like, I'm self-taught. I'm always constantly watching a YouTube video, or I am speaking to someone else who is a more experienced carpenter and asking how they do things, or finding out how people do things. But I'm using some very, straightforward, simple tools: saw, and drill, hammer, nothing very too complicated, a bit of glue, to make these pieces. So the next thing I thought we would think about is thinking again about the materials. And if we're thinking about materials, say in a classroom setting, I like to try and think about how everything came into being. If you start thinking about how everything appeared and came to be in the world that we live in, it becomes quite overwhelming, quite way more complex than we could possibly ever imagine. And so this is a task I've done a number of times with all sorts of different groups of people I've worked with, whether they are 7, 17, 47, 87. We'll pick an object, normally made of wood, because that's something I have an interest in. And people tend to nearly always, we're in most spaces, a nice ubiquitous item like some sort of chair, often made of wood, or have some wooden element in it, or a table that might have some wood in it. And I will ask people, be like, okay, so what's this? What's that table made of? And when we're talking about that, we go, a new piece of paper up. This is a cereal box, still very, there we go. If you're interested in what I'm drawing on, inside of a cereal box. And I'll be like, okay, so there's a chair. There's a chair, and it is made of wood. And I will ask a whole room of people, where did that, or something, be like, where did that wood come from? And someone might say, the woods, the forest. Right, okay. Where is that forest? Where's that wood? And they'll be like, it's in a country. And they might know a country that it comes from. It doesn't matter. None of this matters if it's factually correct or not. I think it's just a really interesting exercise to sort of essentially see how much knowledge about something some people might have. And you end up, I just keep asking loads of questions. I'm like, okay, so where is that? So how does that chair get from this country? How does this chair get from the wood in this country to become in a chair that you're now sat on, or table in a classroom, or whatever? Someone will be like, oh, person did it. And I'm like, which person? And obviously we don't know their name. And they're like, how many? Well, what were they doing? And they're like, oh, they like drove it in like something. I'm like, okay. Do they drive it all the way from that country to here where we are? Does that work? And as we're going through this whole process, which becomes more and more like kind of absurd, but it just highlights the sort of complexities, to me anyway, it highlights the complexities of the world that we live in, and thinking about how materials and natural resources are then taken and processed into something. And what I find so fascinating about it, every time I do this exercise, it goes, people dial into the detail of some very specific element. So if I'm doing it with, so when I've done this exercise with a group of primary school students, they might, if they've just done like photosynthesis, then or the water cycle, suddenly the focus is all about the tree. It's all about like how long it must have taken that tree to grow, and how the rain is one of the elements it needs as part of its nutrients to grow. And then I'll talk about photosynthesis. Or other times, you know, we might be thinking about like countries, and then suddenly people are sharing their knowledge about the different countries like produce, or the different climates that different countries have. Anyway, this can be a really fun task, and as we're talking this through, I end up just like drawing it, and I might be drawing it on with charcoal and a bit of paper. I also might be doing it just on a whiteboard, and if there's none of those available, I often have a dry wipe pen and then just work on a window. And that just gets people to really think about, I guess, not only the materials and where they've come from, but also a sort of their own bits of knowledge, but also their like collective knowledge of the group. So here's my, let's do some more, I'm gonna think about a bit more charcoal techniques. So here's another one. Take your bit of charcoal, and you can also have, or thinking about the different ways of using it. You might, I know I said before, using the material. This material, I'm using it nice and flat. I quite like using it on its edge, on its side, create some sort of background that's just textures, and then draw something else over the top. There we go. Now, on this packaging that I've drawn, what I really like about drawing on packaging is that once you've unfolded it, you can then put it back to how it once was when it was a bit of tape, which can work quite well if you're thinking things through like 2D and 3D. Like, so you'd obviously do a lot neater job than me because I'm doing it as an example. All right, so this works. I really like. Let's do this with a really big cardboard box. It's really fun. One. So it's thinking about how do we turn our 2D drawing into a 3D thing. You do this loads of times, then you've got a whole other, you can go off in a whole other direction where you're using your drawings to build something physically with something 3D, which I find very fun. Another technique to use. Oh, let me find something else that's been fun to work with. Here's some bits of cardboard. There's something that came in the post. Now you can. Now that's a bit of charcoal I made. Let's see how this works. Make like a pile of dust and take a brush and a bit of water. This is me making it as a palette. You always make this sort of like ink using the charcoal. I'm gonna, there we go. I'm gonna draw on this. It's the shadow that are starting to appear now as the sun goes down. But you can see that it almost ends up like some sort of ink. Kind of nice. And while this is still wet, if you draw with charcoal when on a surface where it's still a bit wet, you get a really, really sort of like fine line. Can you see how, like, I know I've used a smaller bit of charcoal, but even if I use this thicker bit, the line you get when it's wet, so that's drying now, it is a lot finer. I don't know why. There's be some science in there, but yeah, this is really nice. I really kind of enjoy this, using the charcoal as a, like, obviously it's messy, but like using it with water to sort of create some really, I suppose, some interesting textures. And obviously you can do this on a separate, I could use this piece that I'm using now as my palette. And here's a bit underneath that I could use with my canvas, I guess. So, see that sort of maybe the ink. And then let's make shapes. I think the key thing with all of this is having a real experiment and play, and realizing that, which I always think so fun, is being like, I've got a few ideas in mind, but then having not explored every single possibility. And if you're opening this up, presenting this and inviting a class to have a go or group, and then knowing yourself that there's a possibility that a student will come up with something, you're like, oh my goodness, that's such a good idea, and you'll use that for the next group. Like, that's always, like, I love it when that happens. And then you can also, if they're happy to, they might want to share it with the rest of the class. So yeah, this is a nice technique, and you can keep layering that up. That's a good bit of charcoal. Brilliant. Whoa, lovely. Okay, so there is just a couple of ideas. For something. Another sort of, I guess, like an idea linked with thinking about the processes is also picking something, choosing an item, a thing, or something that's made of wood and drawing it. Like, that sounds so simple, but I think it's can be sort of brilliant to think about. It's a nice, quiet, reflective. I know before I was saying really enjoy sort of collaborative working. I think there's also something to be said for those, you want those activities that are quite calm and invite people to really just like look at something. So I just went, here's some wooden things bouncing around the house, a wooden spoon, a pencil, ye oldie, ruler, post peg, and just thinking about spending, I don't know, it's quite nice to change the time. Spend 1 minute drawing your item, And then after that, I'm spending on the same piece of paper, like 3 minutes drawing the item. And then just increasing the time each time. Anyway. Oh, that's nice. There we go. Should have done that to begin with. So there are a few ideas, I guess, using some charcoal. I don't know if people were actually, my hands are so mucky. I don't know if people were actually making along with that, but I hope some of that was kind of useful. Does anyone had a go at something and been like, actually, I didn't find that works, or actually that worked okay, or someone done something totally different? I always quite like it when someone does something totally different.
It's really nice observing your process, actually, Sam.
Oh, thanks.
From like a bird's eye view, watching you kind of take on the make first approach just intrinsically. Like giving things a go and then saying, oh, I should have done that, I should have done that first. And then maybe next time trying it first. And just watching you say, oh, maybe that didn't work. Oh, that's nice. And it's very playful and very joyous. And then you have time where you're actually, no, I'm focusing now. I'm focusing in on something and
Yeah.
just providing like 3 lessons.
Mm.
I'm just thinking about when I used to teach art, thinking about my students. That's 3 lessons that
Yeah.
I've done introducing charcoal.
Mm.
And so many children don't actually know that charcoal is a natural material. Like I'm now questioning myself, have I ever shown children how to make charcoal?
Yeah.
It's like something like that. And then you're using the same idea of wood, observe it on a very smaller scale and draw it at different time frames. That's just,
Yeah.
I mean, you continue, but that
No, no,
that
no,
in
no.
itself was it's so curious just to observe it.
Yeah, I think it's a really, I think the to consider all the sort of natural materials that we're using daily,
Mm.
you can really expand this out to sort of all and everything.
Mhm.
I, you can do very similar ones, similar ideas when you think about like materials and the clothes that we're wearing, and you're thinking about maybe like if something is like school uniforms are mainly all made of acrylic or polyester, and then you're like, so that's oil, and they're like, okay, and I'm like, so what is oil and where's it come from? And they're like, and there's, I don't know, it's quite interesting. You'll find there's someone in the class like when I could be after I remember saying this to a group of students who I've been teaching for 3 years. Turns out one of them was just so into fossils and was like, "Sir, they're fossils," and they've got like and I'm like, "Brilliant!" So they knew that process. They knew that, which I didn't know about them, and then no one else in the class knew. And then I was like, "Okay, tell us about how fossils are formed, and then what happens with." Yeah, they were telling us all about all the layers of rock in the earth and anyway, like that sort of thing of like opening that up, that discussion, which I know
Yeah.
is hard and risk and can be, I don't know, it doesn't always go brilliantly,
Mm.
but um
It becomes child-led then. Like
yeah.
one question then leads you down a whole another
Oh
path. And
yeah.
before you carry on, the idea of when Michelle was talking about, representation as well.
Mm.
Well, one way of seeing where things come from is doing that exercise that you did. It's almost like the mapping, almost like a mind map, story map, where you
Mm.
are tracing where things come from, and in the meantime you're seeing how many hands, how many languages, how many different
Yeah.
cultures have touched that object before it lands in your home or in your hands and you use it. And then to turn that back into like a really animated, back to the cereal box, it becomes like an animated story map. It's just, yeah, so far, just so many light bulb moments in my head.
Oh,
Thank
thanks.
you. Please do continue.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's I think there's also thinking about like who we are referencing in the within the classroom that Michele was saying before, and thinking about the different ways that materials are used and accessed, and who maybe like people we've never met. I never met the person who made this piece of cardboard, but someone made it. It didn't grow like the tree it made of grew in the ground of its own accord, but like the process that went into making this, it's like thinking. I don't know. I feel like the art classrooms are the few spaces where you can really sort of like start opening this up, and thinking broader and wider than or introducing the idea of thinking wider and broader than your own personal experience. Yeah, and I will share, and when we put with the recording, I'll put some links to some of the people, some artists whose work have sort of informed this working with charcoal. And I think rather than me showing slides and going through that, I think that's be easier just as links and people can find their own way with that. But yeah, and you can also merge all of this together. It might be, you can have like a drawing of a wooden spoon, and then with it, a map on the same thing of like how it came from and how it got here, and through all the different people and the places and the factory. Like this spoon came from IKEA. This spoon was a gift that someone made for me, and I know that the tree was from it's from a branch from the tree in their garden, and then so with that map with this spoon looks a lot smaller, literally. My mate Alex, tree in his garden, like that. But I did. Oh, I remembered. Here's another one. I just remembered the other thing I was going to show, which is again thinking about like I really like this sort of slipperiness between 2D and 3D. And sorry, I'm just going through my pile of materials here. Where's the one I was looking for? Now, okay. This is a bag from a bakery. It's still sticky with whatever was in it. Now, I can do it on this as well. This is nice. I'll do it. No, I'll do it on the white one. So, take your 2D object, 3D object, sorry, and you can scale this up. The example that someone showed me of this is when I was, I did like a sort of small version of this, and then someone was like, I have seen that done, but a lot better while they're doing it on furniture. And I was like, oh, okay, that is a lot better. It works it's really amazing this when you do this on like a really big scale. So you can use whatever sort of paper. You can use that like newsprint paper, or big flip chart paper stuff. You can. People only ever use one side of that. Just find a roll of it or some of it that's half been used. Pull that off. Use the back of it. Put it down on something like this. Charcoal, and then you just do a rub in. You hold it, so you're holding the paper still with one hand, and then you're doing the rubbing of the object. Now, what's nice about this is you can just do the top like that, and then you've got, here we go, you've got your spoon that's like, so you're taking your 3D object, you've done rubbing of it, and you've made it 2D. Cool. But you can, if you're, I don't know, let's say you're doing, hang on, let me, I'm sure I've got another piece of the same. You can get the same, you do the same thing, but you rub like all the way around it, and it really, it sort of looks 3D, but it also looks a bit, well, we'll see. So here, there's my spoon, 3D item, piece of paper, doing the rubbing. But this time, I'm going to go all the way around the edges. Still trying to hold it down. Don't know how well this will work. I'm not trying it with this wooden spoon. And now if you go all the way along the edges and you let the paper go right down the side, then you end up, it squishes round. You've got this 3D. But then once you've drawn around it, and you let the paper go flat, you end up with this sort of flattened 3D. Does that make sense? I don't know if it does make sense. It's sort of this sort of cubist look of things where you've got perspective doing lots of strange, unusual things. So if I crease this back up and follow the crease lines, then it sort of turns back into, it looks a bit like a spoon. And then you put it on here, it looks a bit like a spoon. And you flatten it down and it just looks kind of abstract and a bit strange. But that can also be fun as well. It's a fun, I think it's a real fun way of thinking about how do we take 2D into 3D, or how do they sort of how do they swap around, how do they change, which I suppose is more of like I guess more of a design element, like where you're so many things in design start as a 2D thing, and then they're going to get processed and fabricated into something that's 3D.
And it's a really nice activity for learners who have fine motor skills, or maybe sometimes you've got reluctant drawers, or an experimentative way to actually learn to interact with material without focusing too much on what it looks like. And it's more of like, I mean, reception children in particular, they love activities like this. But how often do we do this sort of activity where it's more rubbing and experimentative with key stage 2, key stage 3 and 4, and how they respond to a task like this, especially if children do have fine motor issues, or they find it difficult to sort of work their materials in a way that they desire. So I think this is a really lovely activity for all age groups and all of attainment and ability, and fantastic.
Yeah, and I think that's, I don't know, it was always my yeah, I think it's always been sort of an ambition of mine to be able to think when I was in the classroom, or even now when I'm working with communities of people and different organizations and galleries or schools, presenting people with, here's some materials, here's an invitation to maybe do something, and it can be adapted by you however you want to do it, but also that it should be accessible, and not, and that accessibility, or making something accessible doesn't mean that it's like lesser or easier or whatever for someone else. It's just like it's just about working with the material and working with your ideas, I guess. Yeah. Yeah. And then another really simple, like, you can, especially with using like these bits of cardboard from like packaging and recycling is wicked. I love that. And then finding ways of, let's say, put a pair of scissors here. Another way of using, again, doing the 2D, 3D thing is, here's my piece of packaging. Here's my drawing on it. And I've done that. And then I've got this one here. Just finding really simple ways, which is like joining them together. That's like a lot of what I spend my time doing with my more carpentry based stuff. Here's a piece of wood. Here's another piece of wood. That's like, how am I going to put that together? How is that going to work? Can that work? Is there a way I can do that? But just, I think, you know, making just really simple, like, ways that the work can slot together. Whether it's to make like that, that won't work. Sure, it works. That way works. That way works. There we go. But then thinking about how this more 3D approach might then expand to include others. So it's like, yes, you've started on your own to do this drawing, but then it's like, as a whole table or as a group of 5, then how do you build that together to make a sculpture? Or then how does the whole group or a whole class, how do they all then start joining all theirs together to make something more? How do I include this guy from before? Like, do I come along and, you know, do some slots on there? Another one here. I'm thinking about, you know, if you're doing it as then when it turns into group work, obviously there's a whole other dynamic of how does everyone communicate and work together, and which way around is best, or does it even work at all? Or does it look better as a flat thing? Yeah. So I really hope that that was helpful for folk. And I'm very happy for people to ask questions to me, and I think it's totally fine as someone who works a lot with lots of teachers and students and schools, that if you've got a question like, well, what artist might be about this, or how did you do that again? Just send an email. You can do that to lots of artists too. Like when I was in the classroom and I was looking at some artist work, I would most often look at artists who are alive, mainly because you can email them and be like, hey, and okay, you don't always get like, certain very high profile household names, as it may be, artist, maybe you don't hear anything back. But some people, a lot of people, I got all sorts of responses, and people were always really excited to know that as a teacher, you are looking at their work and sharing it with students. And, I think most people are really excited and flattered by that. So they will, be like, oh, what did you use? Like, I asked one artist, I was like, what paint? Like, you said you use this, like, paint, which I never, like, now I use often for things. They were like, you said you use gouache paint, right? I was like, I don't know what that is, which ones? And he just, like, sent a link and then was like, I use these. And I was like, they're great. And they weren't, like, phenomenally expensive either, which is always interesting. Anyway, that's a tangent. Yeah. Great.
That was absolutely fantastic. Sam, I'm captivated. That's brilliant. I can't wait to go and work with charcoal. And
Oh, cool.
yeah, just really, really exciting. You've given us lots of different examples. You've worked, through equity, you've worked through different abilities and making everything accessible, lots of different methods of trialing and failing and trying again. Just absolutely fantastic. So thank you. And if you've got any questions, if you'd like to ask Sam any questions, please feel free. You can pop them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and you can ask in person. In the meantime,
Yeah.
I'll just land on this final slide. And Faith, if you are okay, just to keep your eye on the chat, and if there are any questions, then please do ask. But just to inform you that this is our final CPD session, and that we have got last 2 support sessions before submission. So submissions are on the 7th of April. That's our deadline at midnight. So you've got all day to submit. And we really can't wait to see all of your submissions. It's difficult from our end because we aren't in your classroom and seeing all the fun and the magic happen. So your submissions are just fantastic for us to see as a as the side that kind of doesn't get to have the amazing glimpse into the work that you're doing live. So please do submit. And if you have got any questions or any concerns about submissions, then the support sessions are there to guide you and support you. So for the last 2 support sessions, they're going to be general question and answers, or just pop in to say hi. They're informal, they're not recorded. So please do use them. And if you are currently working on the challenge and with the permission of your school and your pupils, if you've got a school account and you'd like to share what you've been up to, we really love to see that. So you can tag us at the Crafts Council just to take a glimpse into your process. And finally, we like to do this at the end of the CPD sessions, just a little reflection in your own time to scan the QR code and share 3 words that describe how you found today's CPD from Michelle's presentation, any thoughts, any curiosities that popped up, till Sam's make along. If there's anything that you'd like to share, please do pop them on the Slido that you can access with the QR code. We will also have a link of everything that's been referenced today. I think that might be the best way to do it. So Michelle and Sam will send me over any links or references to the things that they've mentioned, and we'll pop them on the website where you'll be watching this video. So hopefully if you look below, you'll have the links there. So once again, thank you, Michelle, so much. Thank you, Sam, so much for joining us today and sharing your knowledge and expertise. We are really, really looking forward to seeing your submissions. Please do submit. And once again, thank you all for being here, for taking part in the challenge. This challenge is nothing without you providing your learners with a really, really rich art design curriculum. So we're really grateful. Thank you for all your work that you're doing, and we hope to see you again soon.